I want to tell you about a murder weapon that sat on library shelves for 500 years. It looked harmless, leather-bound, gold lettering. The kind of beautiful old book you might see in a museum and think, I wonder what is written inside. Generations of scholars handled it. Librarians catalogued it, researchers studied it, and none of them knew they were slowly being poisoned. This is not a horror story, this is chemistry, this is history, and this is absolutely documented. In 2017, researchers at the University of Southern Denmark made a discovery that sent shockwaves through the world of rare book preservation. Using X-ray fluorescence analysis, they found that several medieval manuscripts in their collection were saturated with arsenic, not trace amounts, lethal concentrations, enough to kill. The books had been sitting in libraries for centuries. Anyone who touched them, anyone who licked their finger to turn a page, anyone who breathed the dust from their covers was being exposed to one of the deadliest poisons known to humanity. I am Arthur Scott. This is Case File number 4, and today we are going to explore one of the strangest intersections of history and science I have ever encountered. The books that killed their readers. Let me take you to Denmark. 2017, the University of Southern Denmark in Odense. A team of researchers led by Carl Lund Rasmussen, a professor of chemistry, was conducting routine analysis on medieval manuscript fragments in the university library. They were using a technique called X-ray fluorescence spectrometry. It is a non-destructive method that can identify the chemical composition of materials without damaging them. Perfect for studying precious historical artifacts. The team was primarily interested in the inks and pigments used in medieval manuscripts. What dyes did scribes use? What metals were present in the illuminations? Standard academic research. The kind of work that usually produces papers read by a few dozen specialists and no one else. Then the machine started registering something unexpected. Arsenic. Not in the ink, not in the pigments, in the book covers themselves. The researchers tested multiple volumes. 3 manuscripts in particular showed extremely high concentrations of arsenic in their green pigmented covers. The levels were so high that simply handling the books without protection could result in toxic exposure. Rasmussen and his colleague Jakob Povel-Holk published their findings. The paper was titled Poisonous Books and appeared in The Conversation, an academic news site, in 2018. The story spread quickly. Poisoned books in a university library. It sounded like something from an Agatha Christie novel. But this was not fiction, this was documented science. Now I need to explain something about arsenic and why this discovery mattered so much. Arsenic is what toxicologists call a cumulative poison. Unlike some toxins that are rapidly expelled from the body, arsenic builds up over time. Small exposures that seem harmless individually can accumulate to dangerous levels. Symptoms of chronic arsenic poisoning include fatigue, headaches, confusion, and eventually organ damage. Many of these symptoms could easily be attributed to other causes, especially in an era before modern medicine. A scholar who spent years studying a poisoned book might suffer declining health without ever suspecting the true cause. They might blame overwork, poor diet, the stress of academic life, all while the arsenic in their beloved manuscripts was slowly destroying them. How many people were affected over the centuries? We cannot know, but the possibility is deeply unsettling. Here is the question everyone asks. Why would anyone put arsenic on a book? Was this some elaborate medieval assassination plot? Secret societies eliminating their enemies through contaminated manuscripts? The answer is much more mundane, and honestly, more interesting. The arsenic was not intended to kill anyone, it was there to protect the books. Let me explain. In the medieval and early modern period, bookbinding was an expensive and labor-intensive craft. A single illuminated manuscript might represent years of work by skilled scribes and artists. The materials were costly, the finished product was enormously valuable. Naturally, book owners wanted to protect their investments. And what was the greatest threat to a book in the pre-modern era? Insects. Bookworms, silverfish, beetles, and other pests could destroy a manuscript in months. They would eat through the leather bindings, consume the glue, bore through the pages. Libraries were constantly battling infestations. A beautiful book left unprotected could be reduced to Swiss cheese by hungry larvae. So what did bookbinders do? They treated the leather with substances that would repel or kill insects. And one of the most effective substances available was arsenic, Arsenic compounds, particularly those used in green pigments, were highly toxic to insects. A book cover treated with arsenic-based paint would remain pest-free for decades, maybe centuries. From the perspective of book preservation, it was an elegant solution. There was just one problem: what kills insects can also kill people. Now here is where the story gets more specific. The green pigment found on the Danish manuscripts was likely Paris green or a similar copper arsenite compound. Paris green was extraordinarily popular in the 18th and 19th centuries. It was used in everything from wallpaper to fabric dyes to food coloring. Yes, food coloring. The Victorians were remarkably casual about arsenic. But the use of arsenic compounds in books predates the Victorian era. Medieval and Renaissance bookbinders used various toxic substances without fully understanding their dangers. The green pigments were prized for their brilliant color. The fact that they also happened to contain lethal amounts of arsenic was either unknown or considered an acceptable trade-off. Some researchers have suggested that the toxicity might have been known and even intentional in certain cases. If you wanted to protect a particularly valuable or secret text, what better deterrent than a cover that could poison anyone who handled it carelessly? But this theory remains speculative. We have no documented evidence that medieval bookmakers deliberately weaponized their products. What we do know is that the arsenic was there, and it was dangerous. The Danish discovery was not an isolated case. Around the same time, researchers at Harvard University were making similar findings. The Weissman Preservation Center, which handles conservation for Harvard's vast library system, had been studying potentially hazardous materials in rare book collections. They found arsenic, they found lead, they found mercury compounds. The history of bookmaking, it turned out, was also a history of toxic chemistry, but Harvard's investigation went further. They began looking at the broader pattern of dangerous materials in historical collections. And what they found suggested the problem was far more widespread than anyone had realized. It was not just book covers. Some books contained arsenic in the pigments used for illustrations. Others had lead-based inks that could be absorbed through the skin. Certain cloth bindings were treated with mercury compounds. The cumulative picture was alarming. Librarians and conservators had been handling these materials for years, sometimes decades. Most had no idea they were being exposed to toxic substances. Safety protocols for rare book handling traditionally focused on protecting the books from human damage. Oil from fingers, tears and drops. The idea that the books might be damaging the humans was not widely considered. After the arsenic discoveries, major libraries around the world began reassessing their safety procedures. Gloves became mandatory for handling certain collections. Ventilation systems were upgraded. Some of the most contaminated volumes were moved to isolated storage with restricted access. The University of Southern Denmark took dramatic action with their poisoned manuscripts. The 3 most contaminated books were placed in individual cardboard boxes lined with warning labels. They remain in the library but cannot be handled without special authorization and protective equipment. I find something poignant about this. Books that were created to share knowledge are now too dangerous to read. Locked away not because their contents are forbidden, but because their physical form is lethal. Here is something else the Harvard research revealed. The problem is not limited to medieval manuscripts. Books from the 18th and 19th centuries often contain even higher concentrations of toxic materials. The Industrial Revolution made arsenic compounds cheaper and more widely available. Bookbinders used them liberally. That beautiful green Victorian binding you admire in an antique shop? It might contain enough arsenic to make you seriously ill. The researchers emphasized that the risk from casual exposure is low. Picking up a poisoned book once is unlikely to cause harm. The danger is cumulative and occupational. It affects people who work with these materials regularly: librarians, conservators, researchers who spend years studying historical texts. But even knowing the risk is low, I cannot help but think differently about old books now. Every time I see a beautiful green binding from the right era, I wonder. Now I want to explore a darker question. Did anyone actually die from these poisoned books? The honest answer is we do not know for certain. There are historical cases of unexplained illness that some researchers have reconsidered in light of modern toxicology, though none have been conclusively linked to contaminated books. Consider the phenomenon that some researchers have called library sickness. Throughout the 19th and early 20th centuries, Scholars and librarians occasionally reported mysterious ailments, chronic fatigue, persistent headaches, digestive problems, skin irritations, memory issues. Interestingly, some of these symptoms overlap with those seen in chronic arsenic exposure, though overlap does not imply causation. At the time, these complaints were usually attributed to overwork, poor ventilation, or the general mustiness of old book collections. The idea that the books themselves might be the source of illness was not seriously considered. After all, books were seen as instruments of enlightenment. They could not possibly be harmful, but we now know better. One case that has attracted particular attention is Napoleon Bonaparte. Yes, that Napoleon. After his final defeat at Waterloo, Napoleon was exiled to the island of St. Helena, where he died in 1821. The official cause of death was stomach cancer, but arsenic was found in samples of his hair, leading to decades of speculation that he was poisoned. Recent research has suggested an alternative explanation. The wallpaper in Napoleon's residence on St. Helena was colored with Paris green, the same arsenic compound found in poisoned books. In the humid tropical climate, the wallpaper may have released arsenic vapors that Napoleon breathed constantly for years. He was not assassinated, he was killed by his interior decoration. If environmental arsenic exposure contributed to health issues in historical settings, it raises a broader question about other overlooked sources of exposure, including treated materials such as books. Arsenic compounds releasing toxic particles that accumulate in the body over time. There is no documented case where a specific death has been definitively attributed to a poisoned book, but absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. Before the Danish discovery, no one was looking for arsenic in library collections. How many mysterious deaths of 19th century scholars might have had an unrecognized cause sitting right on their desks? I am speculating here, and I want to be clear about that. This is the kind of question that is probably unanswerable. We cannot go back and test every dead academic for arsenic exposure. We cannot examine their libraries for contaminated volumes. The evidence, if it ever existed, is long gone. But the possibility lingers. And it makes me look at historical accounts differently. When I read about a brilliant scholar who died young from mysterious declining health, I now wonder. When I learn about a librarian who suffered chronic ailments that doctors could never explain, I wonder. It is possible that long-term exposure to contaminated materials may have contributed to health problems in some historical contexts, but we have no direct evidence tying specific deaths to specific books. If exposure played any role, it would likely have gone unnoticed at the time. You might be thinking this is all ancient history, interesting but irrelevant to modern life. After all, who handles medieval manuscripts these days? More people than you might expect. Libraries and archives around the world contain millions of pre-20th century books. Universities maintain special collections. Museums display illuminated manuscripts. Private collectors buy and sell antique volumes. Auction houses handle them regularly, and until the recent discoveries, very few of these institutions had protocols for toxic materials in their book collections. The University of Southern Denmark researchers estimated that arsenic-treated books might represent a small but significant percentage of surviving pre-19th century volumes. No one knows the exact number. Systematic testing has only just begun, but the preliminary results suggest the problem is not rare. In 2019, a study published in the Journal of Archaeological Science examined books from multiple European collections. They found toxic heavy metals in a disturbing number of samples: arsenic, lead, mercury, and chromium. The concentrations varied, but some books contained levels that would be classified as hazardous waste under modern environmental regulations. Think about that. Hazardous waste sitting on library shelves, being handled by researchers, being displayed in exhibitions, being sold to collectors who might keep them in their homes. The risk to any individual is still low. Let me be clear about that. You are not going to die from briefly touching an old book. But the cumulative effect for people who work with these materials professionally is a legitimate concern, and the ethical questions are complicated. Should poisoned books be destroyed? Most conservators would say absolutely not. These are irreplaceable historical artifacts. The information they contain, the craftsmanship they represent, the window they provide into the past, all of this has immense value. Destroying them because they happen to contain toxic materials would be a form of cultural vandalism, but they cannot simply be ignored either. The current approach at most institutions is isolation and labeling. Contaminated books are identified, stored separately, and handled only with appropriate protection. Some have been digitized so their contents can be studied without physical contact. It is an imperfect solution, but it may be the best we can do. Here is what I keep thinking about. For 500 years, these books sat on shelves. People touched them, studied them, treasured them, and the books were quietly poisoning them all along. The danger was invisible, undetectable without modern technology, a threat that no one even knew to look for. It makes me wonder what else we are missing. What other dangers are hiding in plain sight, waiting for someone to think of checking? Let me step back and consider what this case teaches us beyond the specific facts about arsenic and books. We tend to assume that danger is obvious, that threats announce themselves, that if something could hurt us, we would know. The poisoned books challenge this assumption. For centuries, scholars handled these manuscripts without the slightest suspicion that anything was wrong. The danger was real but invisible, present but unrecognized. This is not unique to medieval manuscripts. History is full of examples where we discovered dangers only after extensive harm had already been done. Lead in paint and gasoline, asbestos in buildings, radium in consumer products. Each time, the pattern was the same. Something was used widely for years or decades, believed to be safe, before science revealed the hidden threat. The arsenic books are a relatively minor example in terms of total harm, but they illustrate the principle perfectly. Human knowledge has gaps. Our understanding of what is dangerous is incomplete, and the things we do not know can hurt us. I am not trying to make you paranoid. Most old books are perfectly safe. Most historical artifacts pose no threat. But the assumption that something is harmless simply because it has been around for a long time is dangerous. Age is not evidence of safety. Tradition is not proof of innocence. The researchers who discovered the poisoned books were not looking for danger. They were doing routine chemical analysis for academic purposes. The arsenic finding was accidental. If no one had thought to point an X-ray fluorescence machine at those green book covers, we might still not know the truth. This is why scientific inquiry matters. Not just the dramatic discoveries that make headlines, but the quiet, methodical work of testing assumptions, of checking what we think we know, of asking questions that might seem unnecessary until the answers reveal something important. The medieval scholars who created these books had no way of knowing they were creating poison. They used the best materials available with the knowledge they had. We should not judge them for it, but we should learn from it. What are we doing today that future generations will look back on with horror? What substances are we using? What practices are we following that will turn out to have hidden dangers we never suspected? I do not know the answer, but I know the question is worth asking. So what do we make of all this? A book is supposed to be a source of knowledge, of enlightenment, of connection across time and space. When we hold a medieval manuscript, we are touching something that someone created 500 years ago. Their hands held the same pages. Their eyes saw the same words. It is a kind of communion with the past. And now we know that communion came with a price. I have thought a lot about the scholars who spent their careers studying these manuscripts. The librarians who catalogued them with care and devotion. The collectors who treasured them. They were doing good work. Important work. They were preserving human knowledge and making it accessible to future generations. And they were being slowly poisoned for their dedication. There is something tragic about that, and something beautiful too. Because despite the danger they did not know about, they kept doing the work. They kept studying, they kept preserving. They passed the books down to us. Now we know the truth. We have the technology to detect the poison and the protocols to handle it safely. The books that killed their readers will not kill anymore. Their contents can still be studied, their beauty still appreciated, just with appropriate precautions. That is progress. Not the dramatic kind that makes headlines, but the quiet kind that makes the world a little safer without most people ever noticing. If you visit a rare book collection and see a warning label on a medieval manuscript, now you know why. And if you ever wondered whether books could be dangerous, now you have your answer. They can be. They were. And for 500 years, no one knew. I'm Arthur Scott. This has been Case File number 4. The next time you pick up an old book, take a moment to appreciate not just its contents, but its journey through time, the hands that made it, the hands that held it, the secrets it kept. Some of those secrets were deadly, and some took 5 centuries to reveal. Subscribe if you want more documented case files like this, and comment the next book that deserves to be examined.